Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from that nerdy site get together to talk about their lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cam?
Hey, what's going on, Trevor?
What is going on? So, going to be maybe on the lighter side of things this week. I don't have much to bring to the table myself. So, Cam is going to be chatting about his thoughts on Sandman, Gundam Unicorn, which is a thing I did not know existed until about 2 minutes ago. And then some time he's spent with some Xbox Game Pass games, notably Humanity and Medieval Dynasty. So if any of that rings your bell, stay tuned and listen. Other than that, before we dive into any of that stuff, a little bit of housekeeping. Friday Night Dying Light treks on. It is all recorded in the can. We're still releasing episodes here for the next month and a half, 2 months or so, as Cameron's journey through that apocalyptic zombie world.
I literally almost said Verdansk, but then I remembered that Verdansk is
That's a different zombie game.
That's the name of the country in Warzone.
There you go. Yes, diving through Friday Night Dying Light, our Dying Light 2 series, inspired by, of all things, Friday Night Lights. So you can check that out Fridays at 6 p.m. Pacific time as Cameron winds that down. Other than that, if you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. So yeah, Cam, kick it off. Tell me about the Sandman series, the long-awaited. I know, like gaming fans have been like, this was never going to happen, and it's finally here. So what do you think so far?
I've only seen the first two episodes, which are is not the entirety of the series. It still has a long way to go. But as far as what I saw from it, I was extremely impressed.
Okay.
I really was not hyped or excited about this until I saw the Comic-Con trailer a couple weeks ago. It was quite literally mind-bending how good it looked. And I'm happy to say that it completely translates and correlates over to the main show. This is such an so the premise of Sandman is that in the DC universe, because yes, this exists in the DC universe, there is multiple levels of kind of X-dimensional beings that exist, whether it's the gods of Grecian myth that you have from Wonder Woman and other cultures and stuff, and then on the heaven and hell aspect that is established in things. And so the question that always kind of or not question, but a concept that kind of was created and then, made very popular during Game and Sandman series is this idea of concepts and of principles of existence, not just of humanity, but of existence as a whole. So the ideas of you have death, which is one aspect of life. And what are the other aspects of living? You have desire, you have, just lots of other things. But the main focus of this series is dreams. The idea of what are dreams? Who is basically, where do we go when we dream? And the answer is we go to the realm of dreams, which is governed and lorded by the Lord of Dreams, Morpheus. And he is one of the primal aspects of the universe. And he basically governs dreams and nightmares and these place that lets humanity kind of accomplish and become what it's meant to be. And part of that is, and so at the beginning of Sandman is essentially, if you look at the last, I'd say last century, last 100 years, we've made tremendous amounts of progress, but we've also become very much more well aware of kind of the horrors of mankind. By becoming so interconnected with each other and being able to be in communication with one another in such a quick period of time, it begs the question of, this industrial revolution that we're still in technically, that kind of began its heyday in the 19 teens. Like, is there, like, the idea is consequentially, like, is there something to that? And it tells the story of basically what happened to Morpheus over 100-year period of time, and it's kind of the ramifications of what occurred during those 100 years. And it's extremely good. The first episode is entirely like the setup of what happened to him, and this is stuff in the comic books that in the graphic novels is kind of like pieced out bit by bit. Instead, they're telling it in a more chronological way, which is very, very cool, and makes sense. And they've introduced a couple of different characters that are kind of your exposition, because Neil Gaiman's Sandman is incredibly heavy with text box exposition. And rather than telling it through a text box exposition, because they kind of can't, this isn't Deadpool we're talking about, you have a group of characters that exist to tell that story. And so in the first episode, it's extremely heavy on narration from Morpheus. And then from there, it introduces characters to kind of be, sounding for Morpheus and asking questions. So far, it's been incredibly true to the source material, while at the same time doing its own thing. I think that so far, from what I've seen and what we've been introduced to, it's doing things just quite marvelously. Like, it's quite incredible. Neil Gaiman and two other people, I forgot their names, were attached to the teleplay for this, and have just Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors of all time. He wrote both the book and the script for Stardust, which a lot of people have compared to being this most recent generation's Princess Bride.
I'm one of those. Yep.
Yep. And it's so incredible. He is also the author of the American God series, which is a contemporary look at the gods of the old world, of Odin, Zeus, and all of that, compared to the gods of the new world, that of social media, internet connections, internet communications type stuff, and kind of like taking these like concepts and embodying them in dramatic tellings and stories, and he does such a great job of that. And this is an example of one of his earliest examples, and I'm just blown away by how good it's been so far. I'm watching it with my brother-in-law and my sister, so I haven't been binging it, but I'm very excited to continue watching.
I think only the first 2 episodes are out so far.
Wait, what?
At least that's what I'm seeing on. I mean, I'm looking at
Netflix is releasing it week by week.
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm looking at it on IMDb, and it basically it only has release dates for the first 2 episodes. So, it's typically what I see in that instance.
No way, they are doing it week by week.
And it looks like David S. Goyer and Alan Heinberg are the other.
Yep.
Teleplay.
Nope. Okay, never mind. I'm seeing more dates. Okay, it's all out. It is all out. Okay,
yeah.
never.
Okay,
that's fine. It just I have to say, Tom Sturridge as Morpheus, Dream, as it were, is absolutely incredible. One of the things about Dream in the comic books, is that he is so spectral in his design. His design is just so absolutely spectral. There, the original Sandman comic series is extremely heavy in the goth aesthetic of the late 80s, early 90s, this heavy goth aesthetic. If you saw Dream in the comic books, it's he could definitely be the front man for Tears for Fears, or of The Cure, for sure. He's just he very much embodies this very heavy, tall, skin thinny goth aesthetic that's just very spectral, especially in the way that his countenance and how he acts and what he does. He is it is very interesting to see this character kind of come to life on screen in a way that's both believable and exciting. So I can't wait to see everybody I've seen in it has been phenomenal. Shout out to I'm trying to remember his name, but he was in Game of Thrones. Let's see. Charles Dance. That's it. Charles Dance. Charles Dance is in the first episode. He's phenomenal. It's extremely good. people should watch it. If you're unfamiliar with it, or you're like, I don't know what to even make heads or tails of this, like the trailer that I've seen, don't worry about it. Just jump in blind. This is a perfect show to know nothing about anything and just jump in blind and having a good
All right.
time. Because it tells you everything you need to know, and if you have other questions, they don't matter at the time. And it's like there's just incredible moments of awesome storytelling happening, and I'm just excited that Neil Gaiman continues to do his good.
Very cool. Moving on. You mentioned you've been getting back into your Gundam ways, and you
Yep.
specifically called out Gundam Unicorn, which is a thing. So, what is Gundam Unicorn? And what are your thoughts on it?
Trevor,
Yeah,
before we get in on that, I need to ask you, what do you know about Gundam?
I know virtually not. I know Gundam is like big mecha robots.
So, this is exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exciting for multiple reasons. One, because this just gave me a new idea, and I'll be talking about it and workshopping with Trevor in the future about this.
Oh, I think it's already going to be a pass, but I mean, if it's the idea I imagine you're imagining right now, I'm not particularly interested in getting into Gundam, so um,
That's what you think. That's what everybody thinks. They think, oh, it's this just giant robots.
I mean,
It's like you
I
have
guess the
no idea.
other element of Gundam I know, apart from like the jokes about Andy or whatever, are that Rahu Kohli does a lot of model work with Gundam stuff.
Yes, he does. He's currently now in his Warhammer 40K phase, which is not surprising. It seems like during the pandemic, everybody got into 40K, except for people like me who are like, I'm not spending money on that. That's a money sink and a time sink like you wouldn't believe. No, so Gundam is essentially a mecha or giant robot franchise from Japan. Came out originally in the late 70s. The first one, literally called Mobile Suit Gundam, is Gundam as a franchise is a story about conflict and war, and what war does to especially the youth. A very common trope is that the main character of the Gundam franchises are teenagers, and it's basically how teenagers end up getting tripped up and taken into the conflicts of the older generations and dealing with those conflicts and the lasting traumas that those conflicts occur. Gundam is not a happy series. It's not a fun-go-lucky series saga. It is very if you get a sweet ending, like a nice ending, it is a bittersweet ending. Things are not awesome in the Gundam universe. In the in the franchise's first show and era that we're talking about, which is collectively called Universal Century, literally half of humanity is wiped out in a single year. And it's a commentary on what people are willing to do to each other for the sake of ideology and for the sake of quote unquote order, and what does that mean, as well as the bringing up consequential discussions on what does it mean to be a citizen of Earth, and because the idea is like, oh, if we have a singular Earth government, things will be great, right? Things will be totally fine. We won't have these conflicts anymore that we get from nations. But what happens for people who aren't born on Earth? It brings up this question of sovereignty and citizenship and all sorts of stuff. And it's a very cool way of looking at these concepts through the lens of teenagers being forced into a war and basically being forced and drafted into it due to the fact that these conflicts that are very human continue to exist in the future. The original Gundam series is about a young man named Amuro Ray, and his essentially the trauma that occurs during his initial year of service, and then from there in the Universal Century series, which is like a meta tag for numerous entries into the franchise, where basically they're saying all these series belong in the same timeline. And so you're seeing that play out and go through it. And what ends up happening is you see kind of like, okay, so like, and the thing about it is like the story of Gundam is a story that war is bad. Like this is not this. It takes in the kind of like, oh, I want to see giant robots fighting each other, and inflicts upon you the horrors of warfare, and it's incredibly interesting. And as time goes on, outside of the Universal Century series of entries into the franchise, you get things like Gundam Wing and Double O Gundam, and these are franchises that ask the question of, in Gundam Wing especially, it's like, at what point are your freedom fighters terrorists? At what point do the where does the line cross, especially when you have combatants who are not part of a recognized nation? And when you oppress these satellite nations literally built on satellites out in space, like what is the tipping point for the calls and cries of independence? And it takes a like, and rather than being like talking about it like philosophically from like the position of leaders, it tells the story of 5 young men who, for their own reasons, take up arms to fight in a guerrilla effort to try to impact change on the world, and the things that go well for them and the things that don't. Double O Gundam is, what if you had a small group of people who had technology that and weapons that were far superior to anything anyone else on the planet had, and they came in and said, no more war. If you have a conflict, our Gundams will show up, we'll beat everybody up, end the conflict because we'll basically destroy every tool you have to continue fighting, and then we'll go away and we'll disappear until the next time you guys you saddle raber, or you
Saber
rattle
rattle.
saber. Yeah, you saber rattle. Every time you do this, we will show up and we will put a stop to it by force. And what is like the plan behind that? What is like the thought process behind it? And how does like the mysteries around that? That's Double O Gun. And so you have these franchises that do it incredibly well, and like some are better than others, some are hits, and some others I wouldn't say necessarily are misses, but they're not fantastic. But they each have at their heart like an anti-war story, and a story about how people, like, we need to work towards a future where people can communicate with each other without these boundaries that we put up around ourselves. These ideas of where we came from, our nations, our like ideals. Like, just because we have different ideals doesn't mean that we can't speak to each other. And the moment when you decide that a person's ideals means like the moment that somebody decides that if you're not one of us, you're against us, and there's no room for negotiation, like what the ramifications of that mindset are, and how that mindset is dumb because you're not opening up to the possibility of reaching out to others. And of course, it does speak on the idea of like, well, what if one group of people is reaching their hands out and the other group of people isn't having any of it and is trying to kill the other side? Like, that is also approached on it. Like, they get into some of these like deeper ideas and topics about it in a show built around selling model kits to kids.
That's
like it's
like that's what I was going to chime in on, is like none of what you've spent the last like 8 minutes talking about has made it into pop culture, or into like the broader pop culture like conversation about Gundam. It is all model kits or mecha suits and stuff like that. It is a very surface level, like, this is what Gundam is,
well, yeah, because
with
if we
no
told you what it,
nuance.
well, yeah, because if you told the people what it was actually about, they wouldn't be like, oh, that seems kind of heavy, I don't know. But you're like, no, don't focus on that. Focus on the giant robots fighting each other and doing cool stuff,
I mean,
and beam sabers and stuff like that.
well,
Like, focus on that.
while you were talking about it, like, the analog that I had in my mind was like Hunger Games on its surface is a battle royale-esque kind of thing, but like you realize pretty quickly that that is like an indictment of like a a class
Mm-hmm.
struggle between some kind of sick people in a future society and stuff, and like that I feel like is pretty commonly tied to the Hunger Games like thing. It's you don't hear Hunger Games and just think of like the glitz and glamour or Katniss and fighting and stuff like it versus this where it is like, oh, all I would have thought about, as we clearly touched on with Gundam, is the big giant mechs and the things you can like tactically build. um
And I,
uh
I think part of that also is the fact that we're talking about like the comparison of that is, oh hey, yeah, there's 4 books and or 3 books and 4 movies and some other stuff, and that's it. Where Gundam has literally been around since the late 70s and has just like a literal mountain of content to be like intimidating about, right? Like
mhm.
it can be a bit it can be intimidating to get into the series, especially when you're it's like, yeah, oh, this new series looks cool, and it's like, okay, cool. The reason I even bring all of this up is because I'm about to talk about Gundam Unicorn. Gundam Unicorn is one of the latest entries in the original Universal Century timeline. It's this one and then Gundam Hathaway that I haven't seen yet, came out recently. And those are one is in UC, like Universal Century year 96, and the other is in Universal Century year 100. So we're literally talking about like this very late stage versus in original Gundam was uh, year 79. The year 0079 to 0080 is the 1 year war, as it's called, where half of humanity literally is wiped out during this conflict. It's horrible, and it's the ramifications of that conflict and the kind of like the kind of groups that kind of spring up around it, the politics of people manipulating the post-war effort to their own advantage and everything that comes with that. It's wild. So, and a big part of what this kind of point of the franchise is we're talking about literally kids who are at this point have been like were born like, so the main character in Gundam Unicorn is Banagher Lynx, who is 16 years old, which means he was literally born in the year after the 1 year conflict. So he is literally a child of the post-war.
He's a boomer.
In a lot of sense. I mean,
He's a boomer, but they're not in the era of being called boomers yet. That'll be in the year 140.
Yep. So you have these entries that are beautifully animated with new Gundam designs that are just out of this world cool. And Gundam Unicorn is based on the term unicorn comes from not portrait, but a tapestry of the Lady and the Unicorn, which is a central kind of theme, and also kind of a central theme, but also kind of like a symbolic measure and kind of look at the show itself and like the story it ends up telling, as far as like some of the characters are concerned. But the biggest thing that I think I would take away from it is the fact that it's really good. The writing in it is fantastic. It is a fresher way of being like, oh, I got caught up in this conflict. Well, it's either kill or be killed. It's not focusing on that story aspect, but like a lot of other Gundam series have had to do. And instead it's asking these bigger questions of like, at what point did this previous generation close their hearts off to the ideas that we could understand each other and make peace with each other and get to know one another? And it tells a really interesting generational story from the perspective of, this conflict that happened before this kid was born, and kind of like the horrors and ramifications and the legacies that were left behind by the heroes of that war. And dealing with and one of the characters is literally an embodiment of that kind of heroic legend of one of these characters from the original series. And it is and it tells a generational story about that. That's what's really cool about it. Also, giant robots have giant guns and laser swords and go pew pew out in space. Like, it's badass. It's awesome. I love it. It's been great.
So I'm looking at Wikipedia on this real quick, and just help me understand what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing original video animation was originally released between like 2010 and 2014, and then I'm seeing anime television series that was released in 2016. and it looks like it's saying that the anime is effectively like a recompilation of that original series. So is it basically like they come in, edit some things around, put it more into like an episodic format or something like that?
Hmm.
Okay.
But it does a lot. So originally, Gundam Unicorn was a novel. It
Yes.
was a book that came out,
Yes. Sorry,
and
I skipped ahead because you mentioned you were watching this, and so I knew
oh yeah.
this is not the series novel or the manga that you were you were referring to here,
Hmm.
and this was one of the more video versions of it. But I was like, I'm
Yep.
seeing two different video things here.
Oh, for sure. So originally, for a long period of time, Sunrise, the production studio that has produced Gundam since the beginning, has had like something of a the last Gundam series they put out, what before Gundam Unicorn, was, I think it was Gundam Age, and it didn't do very. And so they transitioned away from that into what was kind of selling, which was their compilation OVAs. OVA stands for original video animation. Usually that is like a one shot, or a another way to look at it is, it's like, hey, we don't have enough material for an entire series, but it also wouldn't be good as just like an hour or 2 hour long movie. So what do we do? And so they put it into this kind of like its own compacted form. For the Gundam Unicorn, they're like, hey, we want to do an animation based off of the novel. They put it together, and then the OVAs came out in a series, as like sequentially. I believe it's 7 OVAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Six
and
6 50-minute ones, and then a 90-minute episode 7.
yep, there you go. So what they've done with for the series, they call it like RE,
0096.
yeah, 0096, as basically a way of saying it's the same story, but what they've done is the series itself lets them give more information about stuff that was cut for the sake of the OVA from the novel. There is a explanation given about why one character is like, he's not excited about it, but he's also willing to go to the extent of, like the conflict of this family, like within it, like one of the characters' families, and like you're like okay with like this happening to your family member, and it's like you have to understand, like, there is a history of like my family like not being good to each other. I'm avoiding spoilers right now, but it's essentially a very interesting look at, and in the movie, in the OVA movies, they really did not give any like spotlight on that or explanation why why there's this disruption in the family, between the family members, and their efforts on different sides of this conflict. And rather than focus, and so the OVAs didn't spend time focusing on that, but the TV show does give those opportunities to bring that up. And it doesn't take like an entire episode, but it does, like, these opportunities to understand character motivations a lot better ends up happening, and getting to know, like, oh, these characters, like, why does this character suddenly care a whole lot about this other character when they didn't have much screen time together? Well, in the novels, they spent way more time together, but in the OVA movies, they don't show that because it's not critical to the overall plot. But in the TV series, they can show, oh, hey, these interactions can show, like, yes, there was a deeper, like, relationship there. And so it's what they're able to do with it. And so I'm super stoked that they were able to do that. It has apparently been successful, but it also looks like we're getting Hathaway movies instead of TV series, which, like, I'm okay with. My hope is, like, yeah, if the movies do really well, they'll turn it into like an RE 100, like 10, like 100 or 101 series, maybe, who knows. But the idea and concept of like what they're telling with this late storytelling in the Universal Century is, so prior to these 2 entries, they have told stories from Universal Century, but we're talking about like way further into the future, like almost 100 years after the original war conflict, like, 60, 70 years later, right? And so we don't have like what happens to the characters that we followed through the original series.
Mm-hmm.
Unicorn and Hathaway are a way to approach that and tell those stories. The novels have already been written. That's pretty much what's going to be canon going forward. I can say it's not like all happy good times. This is Gundam we're talking about. But like there is a way of approaching the storytelling that they had in these novels that I'm really excited to see getting put into animation. I fell off of Gundam for a very, very long time. And it wasn't until following Austin Walker and some other people on Twitter got me back into it. Because it's like, yeah, these people are doing like a Gundam watch along podcast and stuff like that. I'm like, I'm just so curious what these people's feelings are about some of the like these very like cool shows that have like some like historical issues for sure. We're talking about stuff that got made back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Like
Mm-hmm.
not everything's held up, but it's cool to see the stuff that has held up and kind of like has continued to go forward as far as like the themes that they're telling. And also like the character motivations. There's some incredibly cool characters. One of the characters, Char Anzabal, is so famous in Japanese pop culture that they still make stuff about him today. Like if you hear anything about a red comet or a like you see a dude in a weird like a dude in a red uniform with a weird helmet in anything, like that's a reference to this show. This show was monumental for anime and animation in general. And the storytellings that it did to basically be like, we're telling an adult story for kids. And it's done in a war story for kids. And it's done in a way that doesn't shy away from the brutality of it. And so it's a major step forward in storytelling for the media. And it has a legacy to it. And, you know, like, so, and I say this because I don't want to be like, yeah, go watch Gundam Unicorn. There's a lot about Gundam Unicorn you're going to be scratching your head about if you go watch it because like you don't understand like who some of these other characters are,
Mm-hmm.
or you don't understand like, okay, well they fought a war. Like if I didn't tell you that half of humanity was wiped out during a year-long war, if you heard, oh, it's a year-long war, okay, well I mean that's bad, but like it's not like it's like 4 years or 20 years, right? And it's like, no, it was 1 year, but it was really, really bad, you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was really, really bad. And also it's like, and also if you don't understand, like if you've never seen Gundam Char's counterattack, you have no idea about like what half of the references they're making in the show. Because they don't give a like really in-depth explanation about it because you're kind of expected to come into this one with knowing your homework.
Yeah.
So I'm telling people if they want to get a really good from the ground up cool Gundam show that I think is solid from beginning to end, and that includes both seasons, I would say that's Double O Gundam. It's recent enough. We're talking about the 2000, like late 2000s, like the aughts going into the 2000 teens. Animation still holds up. Story-wise, plot-wise, still pretty damn good. And I think it's pretty cool. It's a pretty good one. Some people might say Iron-Blooded Orphans. I would say the first season of Iron-Blooded Orphans is downright amazing and fantastic. The second season, a lot to be desired of. A lot, like, second season, unfortunately, has season 8 Game of Thrones syndrome, where characters who are notably very, very smart get really, really dumb for the sake of drama and plot convenience, and it's really bad. To the point where, like, the very ending still pisses me because I'm like, it's just like such nonsensical bullshit. It doesn't make any sense. Why characters made certain decisions, except to get them in a position where they're not going to be like where they're at risk. And it's like I like my characters being at risk, but I need my characters to be at risk because of like reasonable, rational reasons, not just because, oh hey, we need this plot thing to happen. Hey, you know this thing that happened to them that they should be prepared for? What if they weren't?
Yeah.
It's frustrating. But I will say animation wise, Iron-Blooded Orphans is probably the best one right now. I'd say Unicorn gives it a run for its money, but if we're talking like ground up, its own thing that you can just hop into for people out there listening, like Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Unfortunately, I would say like hold off on that one because you're going to be like, this is amazing. I'll watch season 2. Cameron must be crazy. And then you're going to find out that I'm not, that I'm very, very right about that. And you're going to be very, very disappointed. And it's going to make you sad every time you hear it and think about it. Anyway, so I would say go with Double O Gundam. It's pretty solid from beginning to end. That's the one about the Gundam Maesters, who are these 4 dudes in mobile suits that are super more advanced than everybody else's technology. And they beat up everybody who wants to do a war and make everybody play nice. And like, what are the ramifications of that? They get into it. It's really good.
Okay. Well, there's a 25-minute lesson for Trevor in Gundam. So let's go ahead then and pivot into our last topic. Some games you've been playing, Cam. You mentioned. I'm guessing these are PC, because yeah,
Hmm.
it's Xbox Game Pass stuff that you don't have a Series X or S. But you
Correct.
mentioned you've been hopping into Humanity and Medieval Dynasty. So yeah, tell me about those. I will say I'm one of my most anticipated games of the year is coming out this week on Xbox Game Pass, Two Point Campus. So
Hmm.
I'm gonna bust that out probably on PC, just because I know those games tend to play better on PC and don't have like as smooth a transition into the console space. So shout out to Game Pass. But
Yeah,
yeah, tell
game.
me about Humanity and Medieval Dynasty.
Before we get into that, I saw somebody online on like the kind of funny Facebook group being like, with the PlayStation offerings now, like it's clear the PlayStation Plus membership is the best deal in game. And I just had to like just like sigh and shake my head.
And, I mean,
Um,
people are always gonna be on that tribal train.
I don't know how you can look at like what Game Pass has offered over the last like with the slim pickings that I've gotten through PC Game Pass, not to mention like the overall ones that you get with the console Game Pass. I just don't see how like it's such a like it's a stupid deal. It's a stupid good deal. And people should take advantage of it, especially on PC so we can get more games on PC day one.
Sure.
That's my big push. The day I get MLB The Show on Game Pass on PC, day one, like we will have made it to the promised land. Until
Okay.
then, keep fighting.
Mm.
Yeah, but talking about some Game Pass offerings, I'm just gonna say right now, humanity. If you
It's effectively a
are,
civilization like, right?
yeah, it's just Civ. It's just Civ. That's it. It's Civ with a bunch of different names for things. It's made from the people who made like people who left Sid Meier's or the Sid Meier's Civ 6 team to go make their own civilization. It's like they did their own thing where it's like we're gonna make our own Civ game with blackjack and hookers. Um, except they're gonna be like, we're not gonna make it, so you don't like you pick the like origins of a philosophy rather than taking things from like the actual like historical points of who these leaders are and what their advantages are. It so instead of it being like a like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna pick George Washington or Teddy Roosevelt or Abe Lincoln or Gandhi. Shout out to the bug in original Civilization where if you pick or Civ 2, I think it might have been, where
Where
if you pick
Gandhi was
where
ridiculously violent. Yeah.
yeah, Gandhi was super bloodthirsty because they set him at 0 for his aggression, and the program read it as minus 999, which then converted it into being 999. So he is the most bloodthirsty, ruthless dictator uh, character in the entire game. Shout out to that because that's just phenomenal. Like, still one of my favorite like pieces of video game trivia ever. Yeah, and so Civ. So what humanity does is it says, hey, choose a like way that you want to build out a civilization and philosophy and principles, and rather than having benefits and bonuses relate to a historical icon, let's go ahead and just let you kind of have your own icon that you build yourself and kind of explore it that way. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. And then and then it played exactly like Civilization. And my thought was, why am I doing this when it's not as good at being Civilization as Civilization is? And so I ended up playing it for like maybe a couple hours, and it's
Hmm.
just like it did not sink its hooks into me. I was really hoping and looking forward to like getting more deeper into its systems, but it just it drags. It drags in that early game, and it's just like it's not as well it's not as well organized as Civ 6 is or Civ 5. Civ 5 in my personal opinion is still like the best civilization we've ever gotten. But Civ 6 is still pretty
Hmm.
um so that part of it's a bit disappointing. That disappointment was made up entirely by Medieval Dynasty. So Medieval Dynasty is really interesting and fascinating because it's like a first person builder game and like survival game. Not unlike your kind of your
Minecraft,
Valheim, Minecraft,
Rust,
yep, all
all
of
those.
those.
Yeah.
But instead of it being like that, it said, "Hey, what if you established like an actual dynasty?" So you start off as the oldest child, like the oldest son from a like farmer's family that gets caught up in war, and so you run off and you go to basically you go to where your uncle's supposed to be. things don't work out that way, and instead his buddy sets you up with some land, and basically he's like, listen, go build a house, build a settlement, and like, build out, like, and survive, like, build, like, you have a new life, go start something. And what this does that's really interesting is essentially you don't just build up your own personal settlement, you actually eventually have, like, you hire people on, you have kids, like, you get married, you have kids, like, it's a whole nother part of the equation of these things that, like, is pretty cool. It does some really interesting stuff with it. So I'm not too far into it. I'm probably only about 8 or 10 hours into it. But so far from what I've seen, it seems pretty cool. I like what I'm seeing. I'm liking the kind of combat and action, and kind of like the way that they build up around the ideas of, like, stamina, food, and whatnot. Like, it's not super harsh or punishing, but at the same time, like, it's not as simplistic or one note as I think the craft is. So
Is
it's
it
yeah.
you mentioned like you're building up a dynasty and you're getting married, having kids, like bringing other people into your community. If you die, do you like then become one of those other people? Is it what is it like? Is it State of K does that, I think, or something like that? Is that how, or is it permadeath? And if you die, then
No,
everybody's gone.
you get permadeath if you don't have an heir, basically.
Okay. So
So
so so it's Rogue Legacy in that like you become your kid if you
mhm.
die.
Yep, and that's kind of the idea and principle behind it. It's cool. Like, I think it's super. I'm not, like I said, I've only gotten about, like, roughly around 10 hours into it, probably a little bit less, but like I've had a grand old time with it. Building things out, and like it's been very very cool to kind of like play through it, and it's kind of scratching an itch that I'm like, I kind of want to like build stuff, but I don't want to just like build it in like Settlement Survivor. I
Hmm.
want to actually like build it, but I don't want to play Minecraft, and I don't want to play these other games. And so it's like, okay, but hey, it's because instead of it being like, oh, I'm building out a base on one of these places, it's I'm actually like building something worthwhile.
It's going to be a very
It
interesting game of the year conversation for for us this year. Just
We are so scattered all over the
with
place, man.
with
It's
the
wild.
weird collection of games we've all been playing this year, I think.
Game Pass has truly been like the gum in the works of
Hmm.
like our traditional what we normally have been doing. Because Game Pass is just like
I think
Vampire Survivor, dude, is still super high on my list for game of the year. Like, it's been
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like just the idea that this year has been so like it was very like front loaded with a lot of big games, and then like the last 4 or 5 months have been like small stuff. Hasn't been like
Hmm.
triple A like onslaught of games that like we're all like, oh, we all have to hop in and play those things. So it is like, yeah, I like on Game Pass recently, I hopped into Power Wash Simulator or As Dusk Falls. Um, I have played like a couple more chapters of Live Alive since we last spoke, um, and that's continuing, not Game Pass related or whatever, but like just in terms of like the things that like are pulling me in right now, and even those aren't pulling me in so much as like I'm busy with another enough other things that I'm like I'll get back to those things at some point, and just
Hmm.
haven't so far. So um yay for yay for big adult jobs and work, and not being able to just like sit down and be like, I'm gonna just spend 20 hours playing this game this weekend. Or even just not necessarily like, I maybe still could do that sometimes, but there hasn't been a thing that has called me to. Or
Hmm.
like the most recent example there of like As Dusk Falls, I played the first chapter of that, and like it was a tense enough experience that I did not want to just immediately jump back in and continue playing through that game. I have kind of needed some space from it before coming back, which is very weird because like if that is a game that had released episodically, I would have waited until it all came out to play it anyway. So it's like it's this weird thing of like maybe they were right doing some of those games, like some of those Telltale-esque games, as episodic stuff. But I imagine they probably saw a ton of like drop off. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a fascinating year. I was thinking about that the other night of like just depending on like what everybody's playing and stuff like that. Like it's entirely possible. Like I don't think either of us are like Dying Light fans enough, but it's going to be one of the few games that Logan plays this year, so it'll probably get a buttload of points from him or something. So, if we do our typical thing, it's like that score abnormally high on our game of the year stuff. Or I mean, just the fact that like your presumed love of Elden Ring will probably kick that game into, the upper echelons of our game of the year list if
Oh my god,
we
Elden
don't
Ring
have
came out this
other
year.
stuff that like all of us are hopping into and playing and checking out. Like I don't think there's going to be that like one game this year that all of us really like latch onto. So it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, this is a wild year, man. This is a really wild year.
Yeah.
Um, shit. One thing I will say is that I do have some like catch up to play on some games. Like I clearly have been like dealing with like between losing my job in February or leaving my job in February and then working as a sub until the summer and then getting a job in June and starting that. And you and I have talked about like the like one thing I will say, moving back into working in an office has not been an easy transition.
Mm-hmm.
I think I do prefer like at least for the majority, like if I was offered a hybrid schedule, I would definitely take it. Like working from home a day or two a week, working in the office the rest of the 3 other days. The problem is that there's so much efficiency of like just being able like to go into like the other room and grab my boss rather than just like ping him on a message and like hopefully I can find time for him sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Like the advantages of working in an office are very like apparent to me. That being said, like I think like I'm in a unique situation where like the hierarchy of my office is like so condensed
Mm-hmm.
from like bottom to top is only like a couple of people versus something that is like more like thousands or tens of thousands of people throughout that organizational hierarchy that I think that works better for stay at home. But as far as like the actual like what I've been doing, like so I do appreciate working back in an office, but it's been brutal because there's just not as much getting back into a commute has been so.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm looking forward to like and that's it. So like my like because now it's just like I'm going back to being used to only having 4 to 5 hours to do something after work,
Mm-hmm.
which I already like that was already the case. But when I was working from home, that's not really how I saw it or felt about it.
Yeah.
And so like my life revolving around work rather than just living and surviving, like it was during like the height of the pandemic and working from home. Like it's been an interesting transition getting back into that, but so like I have not had the kind of like wherewithal to kind of like wanting to hop into something big. Like I still need to play Strangers of Paradise. I still need to play Fire Emblem Three Hopes. Like those are two major games that I still need to play this year. But and like I need to play them before November for sure, especially if God of War ends up coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a lot still coming out for the rest of the year that we still have coming out, and it's gonna be a heavy end load year for sure.
Yeah, potentially. Like there's definitely a like there are bigger titles coming out end of the year. I don't know how eager I am to hop into them. Like Gotham Knights being like one example where I'm like,
Yeah, no.
am I really gonna care about that one? Like nothing has sold me on that game yet. At least nothing has sold me on that game as like a must play day one kind of experience. But we'll see. And then like Saints Row's one of the other big ones. I mean, like for me, really, Starfield was one of those like end of the year things that I was gonna spend a bunch of time in because
Yeah,
like
same.
big fan of like the Fallouts and your Skyrims and stuff like that. And so when that got pushed, I was like, okay, well the end of my year is potentially going to be grabbing things that came out earlier in the year that I didn't pick up on sale and maybe checking those out. Like if I'm going to hop into Elden Ring at all and be masochist enough to give that a shot, that's when it might happen. Will be at the end of the year. If I can get it on sale for $30 or something like that. But we'll see. Yeah. Be interesting to see how all of this shakes out. But until then, we've got it's definitely fun hopping into games that I'm like, I know this isn't going to be a game of the year contender for me, but it's a thing to do to pass the time, and an experience to have, and especially if it's a Game Pass game of like I'm not spending money on it that I didn't already spend. It's the time that I'm putting into this thing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, or even hey, the all the Yakuzas are supposed to be coming to PlayStation Plus and Game Pass again soon. So maybe I'll go back and like revisit and pick back up my Yakuza playthrough back with Yakuza 3's where I left off. So who knows what we'll do from here, but cool. Well, thank you for sharing all these things you've been checking out with me, Cam. Hopefully I'll have some time to sit down and do some more stuff this coming week that I can actually talk about for next week's show. But that is gonna do it. So let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you for joining me. Let's go around our metaphorical table here with any plugs we might have. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Cam?
Yeah, episode 28 of Friday Night Dying Light is coming out this Friday. Stay tuned for that. There is a lot of ramifications from this last week's episode that are going to be kind of coming out in this one. As we kind of head towards the end game on this, you're going to see a lot of fallout from decisions that were. So look forward to that.
Yeah, it's fascinating having played through everything now, and now like when I get your descriptions, seeing like where in the game you're at, and yeah, realizing that you are getting that point of like not quite the point of no return yet, but you are at the point where like everything that you've done in the lead up to that point of the game is going to start. Like yeah, all of those decisions you made earlier on are going to start mattering a lot more, and the story will start kind of changing accordingly. So, very cool. You can follow me at Trevor J Starkey. I will give a shout out to this most recent That D Plus show, where Logan and I sat down and talked about Lightyear, the latest Pixar film. Fascinating little fun conversation. Both of us, I think, were largely mostly on the same page of like it's not a bad movie, but it certainly doesn't reach the highs that like we're accustomed to from Pixar, and it definitely makes a lot of like interesting like they set cool ideas up, but then they don't follow through with them, or they just kind of abandon them, or they just kind of like ideas sputter out, and it's like, oh, but like if you done the things that like you maybe teased you were gonna do, it could have been like so much cooler. But yeah, so go check out that episode of That D Plus Show. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, and go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest content from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.